Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to look at the world a little differently. I want you to imagine the entire planet as a giant, high-stakes global chessboard. But on this board, the rules, well, they aren't written by kings or queens. They're written by rivers, oceans, mountains, and vast stretches of land. I mean, think about it. How does a country's access to deep-water ports, or maybe being locked in by impassable mountain ranges, shape its economy, its security, and ultimately its survival? Take a second and just think about how the physical geography of your own country has dictated its history. That right there is the absolute essence of geopolitics, and today we're unpacking its fascinating evolution. Okay, let's dive into this historical roadmap. We'll be walking through a chronological journey covering the mother of strategy, sea power versus land power, the organic state, the strategy of containment, and we'll wrap up with modern gateways and shatterbelts. Starting off with Section 1, the mother of strategy, geography, and security. You know, theorizing about the relationship between geography and security is actually one of the absolute oldest themes in Western political science. As theorists Colin S. Gray and Jeffrey Sloan put it, geography is literally the mother of strategy. It sets the foundational, unchangeable conditions for attack and defense, on land, on sea, and eventually even in the air. But geopolitics has had a pretty rocky history. It actually fell out of favor late in the 20th century because critics accused it of environmental determinism. Basically, the idea that the physical environment strictly dictates human culture and actions, completely ignoring human free will. But today, geopolitics is making a massive comeback. And why is that? Because the physical environment still dictates reality. In his historical case studies, scholar Jakub J. Gregel proved that great powers succeed or fail based on the location of resources and the layout of trade networks. So states still increase their power by physically controlling those geographic lines of communication. Moving on to Section 2, sea power versus land power, the foundational debate. To really understand this debate, we have to travel back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. A massive, world-altering debate erupted among strategists over a single question. Do the oceans or the continents hold the ultimate key to global dominance? Enter Halford J. Mackinder, a British polymath and a founding father of modern geopolitics, who published a theory containing this absolutely unforgettable catechism. He wrote, "Who rules East Europe commands the heartland. Who rules the heartland commands the world island. Who rules the world island commands the world." Now, Mackinder defined the heartland as an area roughly contiguous with the modern Russian Federation, basically an impenetrable natural fortress. And the world island was the combined landmass of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Now, what's really interesting here is the direct clash of visions between two brilliant minds. On one side, we have American naval officer Alfred Thayer Mahan arguing for sea power. He firmly believed that commercial maritime expansion and a massive navy were the absolute prerequisites for dominance. His theories literally prompted the U.S. Navy to transition into a global force. In fact, his work was so incredibly influential that Kaiser Wilhelm II ordered a copy placed on every single ship in the German Navy. But on the flip side, we have Mackinder arguing for land power. Mackinder possessed this deep underlying fear that a Eurasian alliance could somehow consolidate and control the massive resources of the inner core, making them completely immune to the reach of British or American ships. Mackinder brilliantly saw technology as the primary driver of history, and he divided history into three distinct periods. First, you have the pre-Columbian era, where the closed Eurasian heartland was the ultimate pivot of power. Second, the post-1492 era, which brought the age of maritime exploration and made sea power dominant. But it's that third point that is absolutely crucial. Mackinder believed that the 20th century invention of modern land transport, specifically railroads, would make land power supreme once again. Mahan, as you can probably guess, vehemently disagreed. He believed those sea highways would always remain the dominant arena for global economic competition. That brings us to Section 3. The organic state, geography takes a dark turn. As we move into the era of the world wars, we need to objectively examine how these abstract academic theories morphed into highly destructive justifications for aggressive state expansionism. And it really starts with German geographer Friedrich Ratzel. His core concept was pretty radical. He argued that nation-states function exactly like living biological organisms. Heavily influenced by social Darwinism and theories of resource scarcity, Ratzel viewed national frontiers not as permanent, rigid lines drawn on a map, but as dynamic, shifting peripheral organs of a living state. To Ratzel, a state had to constantly grow and expand its borders, or else it would biologically die. So the crucial point here is understanding these terms objectively to see exactly how history unfolded. From this biological viewpoint, Ratzel gave us the concept of Lebensraum, which translates to living space. Under this framework, annexing the territory of weaker states wasn't just a ruthless political choice, it was framed as a fundamental biological necessity for the dominant state to enlarge its life space. Couple that with autarky, the idea of achieving complete economic protectionism and self-sufficiency, and you can see how these academic concepts directly fueled and justified Germanic expansionism and those horrific notions of racial superiority. Let's walk through how Ratzel's ideas dangerously evolved through three key theorists. First up is Rudolf Killen, a Swedish student of Ratzel. He infused the nation-state with extreme authoritarian nationalism, actually coining terms like Reich and Volk to describe a centralized military state based around a specific ethnic group. Then we have Friedrich Naumann. He proposed Middle Europa, basically a Central European hegemonic military force meant to stave off outside threats like the Ottoman Empire. And finally, Karl Haushofer, who linked Lebensraum directly to colonial imperialism, dividing the world into these massive pan-regions. Historically speaking, it's undeniable that these specific geographical theories were heavily utilized to drive the catastrophic actions of the Third Reich. Which leads us to Section 4, the strategy of containment, the Cold War chess match. Following the sheer devastation of World War II, the geopolitical map shifted into a highly tense bipolar world. We see a hard pivot away from aggressive expansion and toward defensive strategy. Enter Nicholas Spikeman, who is often considered the godfather of containment. Spikeman proposed the Rimland theory, and this directly challenged Mackinder's old Heartland theory. Spikeman argued that the Eurasian periphery, the Rimland, held the true key to global power, not the core. Why? Because the Rimland states had access to the sea, they had incredibly diverse natural resources, and they were exposed to outside innovation. Spikeman believed that controlling the edges of Eurasia was the ultimate prize. Therefore, he argued, U.S. involvement in Europe and Asia was absolutely essential to pen the Soviet Union inside its core. Let's see how this builds into real-world American foreign policy, because containment evolved in three very distinct steps. Step 1. George Kennan initially proposed economically containing the Soviet Union. The idea was to provide aid to developing, non-aligned nations to prevent Soviet ideology from taking root there. But then, Step 2, Paul Nitze escalated things dramatically with NSC-68, arguing that the U.S. needed to achieve strategic prowess through a massive military arms race, preventing Soviet nuclear superiority. And finally, Step 3, figures like Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon adapted containment by deploying regional surrogate powers, for example, backing the Shah of Iran in the Persian Gulf. This allowed the U.S. to manage containment without directly deploying its own military everywhere. Later on, during the Carter administration, advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski viewed Soviet actions as a unique brand of organic imperialism that was born out of deep territorial insecurity. To counter this on the global chessboard, he outlined three pillars of containment. First, maintaining a permanent U.S. diplomatic and military presence in Eurasia, primarily through the NATO alliance. Second, fostering a strong, economically resurgent Europe. And third, supporting an independent China. These three specific geographic pillars were the structural blocks used to defensively counter Soviet hegemonic ambitions across the board. And finally, Section 5, Gateways and Shadow Belts, the modern fragmented map. So the Soviet Union collapses, the Cold War ends, and today we play on a completely different map. It's highly networked, but it is also incredibly volatile. Geopolitics right now is best understood through the modern analysis of Sal B. Cohen. On one side, we have what he calls shadow belts. These are volatile regions, like the Middle East, with endemic conflicts that constantly defy and frustrate major outside powers. On the other side, we have gateways. These are autonomous, internally stable regions, like Eastern Europe or the Transcaucasus, that serve as vital economic entry points. Guys, these are the regions that dictate the global supply chains, the fuel prices, and the trade networks that we all rely on every single day. Instead of one massive ideological war, today's geopolitical map is driven by this dynamic equilibrium of economic networking and the rapid diffusion of technology. So we end exactly where we began, looking down at this massive global chessboard. The rivers, the oceans, the mountains, they literally haven't moved an inch. But the ways we traverse them, trade across them, and defend them, that is constantly evolving. In a world defined by modern shadow belts and economic gateways, who actually holds the new keys to power? Will advanced technology eventually erase the need for geographic borders entirely, or will the physical map always dictate human history? It's a provocative question, right? And it's one that guarantees the next chapter of human geography will be just as thrilling as the last. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes on the map, and as always, keep learning.